Hello guys, welcome back to SSA Athletics, and today we're going to be looking at Karsten Warholm's 400 meter hurdle world record, which he set in his home country of Oslo, Norway. Now if you could smash subscribe, check out the Facebook pages where we talk about more about the club and training, and well as our new website that will explain about SSA Athletics.
A little birdie has told me that 99.3% of you haven't subscribed. Let's change that.
Now I will be reacting to this, and this will be the first time I've reacted to the video, or the first time I've seen this video. So I'm looking forward to it. I hope you're looking forward to it. Let's get into the video. So here he is coming up to the start line, slapping himself, really screaming, scaring all the kids in the process. And he likes to get into a higher state of arousal before he gets, and he finds that showing that externally works for him. So he sets himself, he makes sure he's the last one into the blocks, really playing mind games, but also it might be just his general routine and pattern. So he goes off, explodes out the blocks, does a really good start, really drives into that first hurdle, and he likes to get out quick. They all like to get out quick, but he's getting out quick in particular. And he really pushes it down that back straight, really attacking, speeding into those hurdles and maintaining his speed as a result around it. Now he comes round the bend, and this is where he really pushes on, attacks the bend. He did that roughly around about 22 seconds. So now his little stutters in there, but he's got over that fine. He's running on. Stutters again. Ooh, take that one cleanly, and the second to last. Last one, brilliant over that last hurdle. You really got to keep that speed over the last hurdle, because that can affect your times. And he then does his Superman dive over the line. Absolutely amazing, that. And he can't believe what he's done. 46.70. That is ridiculous. That is a ridiculous time. He's absolutely smashed that world record. To break 10th of a second off of that world record is just ridiculous when it comes to sprint. Yes, it is the 400 meters, so it's going to be larger out from it, but that is utterly ridiculous. To give you an understanding, Kevin Young's world record, the world record before that, 47.33, that stood from Barcelona 1992. He's just gone and absolutely demolished.
So we're going to look at Karsten and his start first of all. As we can see, he is in lane 7, the second from outside lane. And as we notice here, he has an exceedingly quick start, and he's already up with the outside runner up by the first hurdle. This is unusual, you don't normally see this. And as we see from this beautifully filmed angle here, Karsten's really quick start. With the guy from the outside lane in lane 8, you can really appreciate his reaction time. And as we can see, as Karsten comes off from the blocks, he has that massive stride length for the first two. He really drives those legs forwards to eat that ground when he comes up. Then he starts getting into that other part of the drive phase, and they become shorter strides, and he picks up very early, actually, a very early pickup, which is unusual for 400 meter hurdles. Not so unusual for the 110 meter hurdles, but very unusual for the 400 meter hurdles. Now for sprinting, we want to be in that lowered position for roughly around about 30 meters or so. Then we slowly pick up in that pickup phase until we reach perfectly vertical. And most people will start to pick up from about 30 meters. And the reason being is because this maximizes our drive phase. But after a while, if we're driving, we're not necessarily... The drive phase basically helps with acceleration. But once we start to pick up, we're not accelerating anymore. We're trying to maintain speed. Now, a lot of coaches get hung up about this and believe that you shouldn't be driving beyond 30 meters and that you shouldn't be upright until you reach past 30 meters. And that's not particularly the case. They are correct in a certain respect that the vast majority of athletes will want to be in a drive phase up to about roughly 30 meters. However, not all athletes are like this, and some athletes will be slower if they're in a drive phase for longer. For instance, Flojo is a fine example of this. When she used to sprint back in the 80s and early 90s, she would often come up around about 20 meters or so, before then going straight into her upright phase. We still want a smooth transition from that drive phase into the pickup, into your upright phase, your sprinting phase. But some people are going to start around about 20 meters, but the vast majority are going to start picking up from about 30. What is unusual when we look at Karsten Warholm, he is a 400 meter hurdler. So for him to pick up so early, that is bizarre. That's almost counterintuitive. Because for the 100 and the 200 meters runners, mainly the 100 meter sprinters, is that if they come about 20 meters, it doesn't really matter so much if it's right for them, because they've only got such a short distance to sprint. The 400 meters and the 400 meter hurdlers, they've got to maintain that speed for longer. So therefore, there's a greater chance of them dying by the end if they pick up so early, meaning they don't necessarily get to the full speed and then die earlier. The 100 and the 110 meter hurdlers have to get up earlier, have to get bolt upright sooner because they got a hurdle within 8 strides of them. But any good performance has to happen from the start. What makes Karsten Warholm one of the more interesting characters from a crowd perspective is what he does to build himself up for a performance. People need different levels of arousal, and what level you are in is part of your zones of optimal function, hence why people say the zone when they talk about competition, being in that zone. But whatever you do, it A, has to be best for you, and B, it has to be consistent. No point doing what works best for other people, because it may not work best for you. You've also got to have a certain ability to be able to adapt. And also you got to know that not every situation is going to be the same. And also, just because it works now doesn't necessarily it means it will work in the future. We all change over time. What Karsten is really good at is attacking those hurdles. Here we see him going over the first hurdle. These camera angles are far better than the television one. I don't know why, they always have awful camera angles. But as we can see, he drives and he attacks that first hurdle as soon as it's up. The others do the same, but they don't do it as well as he does. Now let's take a look down the back straight. What makes Karsten different over the back straight is that he actually increases his speed down the back straight, whereas the others look to maintain and then push it on round the bend and hopefully sprint home by the end. He doesn't. He goes over, he attacks those hurdles, and he really tries to drive home an advantage over the first 200 meters. This means he will die quicker when he reaches the 100 meters. But hopefully by then he's so far out in the lead, it doesn't matter so much. When it comes to sprinting, and the 400 meter hurdles in particular, going out hard from lane 7 and lane 8 is actually advisable, because you've got more of a bend, so you need to sprint that little bit harder in order to get that speed, to maintain that speed, because it's easier to sprint on the straight than what it is on the bend. It's tighter in lane 1 and 2, but those lanes, in my perspective, aren't necessarily as bad as lane 7 and 8. However, for someone like Karsten Warholm, who has to, his tactics is to sprint out early, sprint out hard and maintain it, lane 7 and lane 8 is actually the perfect lanes. It's also the perfect lanes potentially to get negative splits, although in reality you can get negative splits in any lane. And what we mean by negative splits is that the first 200 is slower than the second 200, which is extremely hard to do in a 400 meters, especially in the 400 meter hurdles. Nonetheless, Karsten has done this once before. Now we can look at Karsten Warholm's hurdling technique, which is exceedingly good. He comes up to the hurdle, he sights the hurdle, then he looks over the hurdle, he knows where the hurdle is. He drives into the hurdle, he comes up with his leg, whips it round, down, puts that outgoing leg, the leg that was the rear, that's now driving off, out in front of him to eat that ground up as he goes off, and utilises the speed into the hurdle and drives a bit of speed off the hurdle. Basically, we want to speed up into the hurdle, go over the hurdle, speed out the hurdle in order to maintain our speed round the track. Otherwise, we excessively slow down, because generally we have around about the elite level, 3-second differential between our flat time and our hurdle time. And I'm not too sure about the commentator's analysis when he states that he stutters into the hurdle or around the bend on at least 2 of the hurdles. Looking back on reflection, utilising this camera footage, we see that he shortens the stride, and for most of them he actually elongates his stride into the hurdle in order to maintain the speed the best he can. Now generally we don't want to shorten our strides, but we do want to be able to get it on the right leg. In his case, when we mean the right leg, I don't necessarily mean the right footed leg, I just mean the leg you want to take off of. In hurdles we have to take off with both legs, and generally we will have a stride pattern going round. Usually when they start to tire out, usually by the 150, they would go off on their other leg, their non-dominant leg, or the leg that's, or the right leg, because generally you want to keep the left leg, because if you can, it keeps you closer to the bend. Now what is interesting about Karsten Warholm is that he does 13 strides, and he did 13 strides all the way round, which is extremely hard to do. The average elite 400 meter hurdler would do between 14 to 15 strides. So he's cutting out a stride between each hurdle, which in turn makes him a lot faster, especially he's able to maintain it. Now, it doesn't necessarily make you faster for most people doing 13 strides, because you have to maintain the power and speed. So in theory, you could do 15 strides but be more powerful and have more speed throughout the hurdle and still get around quicker than someone doing 13 strides in theory. But by cutting a stride out, you save so much time around the hurdles, providing that you have the power and speed to do it like Karsten Warholm has. He is also incredibly relaxed as he's sprinting, a incredibly relaxed sprinting technique and an incredibly good, low, relaxed hurdling technique. He's not trying to push it, he's not trying to overdo it, he's not trying to be tense as he goes over the hurdles, nor is he sprinting. Now, as we can see in lane 8, the guy behind him, he's really trying to rock it, really trying to push it, and ends up almost stacking it over the hurdle. In fact, how he's managed to maintain on his feet and keep sprinting and not fall over is absolute miracle and a masterful of core strength. You'll note as he comes down the home straight, you're trying to sprint it, you're trying to go home, you got that last hurdle, it gives you a guide into the hurdle, you sprint into it, you try not to stutter, you try not to slow down, and you push off home to the finish. Now, you'll notice with Karsten Warholm that the guy on the outside is gaining on him because he is not losing his speed as much as Karsten Warholm, as we have mentioned previously. But the damage has already been done. He's already in the lead, he's already got the lead, and the other guy is going to struggle to get to him. Now, the guy in lane 6 did an awesome job and ran an awesome time, one of the fastest times in history. But he clearly on the day wasn't as good as Karsten Warholm. Now let's talk about the not so precise art of sighting a hurdle. You will often hear coaches talk about you must sight the hurdle. But what do they mean by sighting the hurdle? Well, obviously it means looking at the hurdle, but it doesn't necessarily just mean looking at the hurdle. And for some athletes, how they look at the hurdle and what they do to look at the hurdle and how long they spend looking at the hurdle and what part of the hurdle they look at is going to be different. One thing that unites all hurdlers is at how long they spend looking at the hurdle. And they often will process that information quicker. They go around the bend, you generally look into your side slightly in order to help cover that bend quicker because it turns your head, turns your body around, makes you whip around that bend a lot easier. Yes, you got hurdles to think about, so that adjusts how you run around the bend slightly compared to the average 400 meter runner. Then once you see the hurdle, you sight the hurdle, you gauge how you're going to do it, which leg you're going to go off from, and that comes with practice. And you go in and you tack the hurdle, but you're looking over and past the hurdle itself. Once you're in the process of going over the hurdle, that is what you do. You look over the hurdle, not necessarily at the hurdle. The longer you look at the hurdle, especially the frame, the more chance you are got the stutter. When we look at Karsten Warholm, he's already decided which leg he's going to go off from really early on in the actual run up into the hurdle. And this is unusual for most 400 meter hurdlers. Once he has sighted the hurdle and is about going the process of going over the hurdle, he's looking for the next hurdle and his head is turned around the bend. Now that we're down the home straight, we're sprinting as hard as we can, we see the last hurdle, we drive off and we want to push home, utilising that as our cue to push home, to drive and bring home the victory. And this is where Karsten Warholm does his infamous Superman lean, although it's not a very good technique. Unlikely to find this in a textbook on sprinting, but the Superman lean, you basically come up, you still got to lean forward and then you stick your arm forward, whatever's closest to the line. And this helps not only to bring forward part of the chest because it's measured from the chest, bring forward part of the chest away from the main part of the body, but it's also really good for those who aren't really good at doing a standard lean, driving the chest forward, bringing the arms back. So by just sticking your arm forward, it's a lot quicker than doing that particular form of technique, and it's a lot easier to do. Karsten Warholm doesn't really lean. You still got to lean into the line when you're doing the Superman lean, if you're doing that technique over the more traditional technique. And he just runs up and then just kind of just flaps his arm out in front of him. It's got to be a bit more precise than just swimming and flapping your arm out in front of you. Nonetheless, there's no one around him. He's just broken a world record, so in fact, who really cares? And also, his hands are awful. Now he utilises a clench fist technique, and generally with a clench fist technique it's very hard to flap. And what we mean by flap is that as his arms come back, it kind of just waves behind him, which is less aerodynamic, less powerful, and also it's much slower as a result. He's probably losing tenths, if not thousandths of a second because of it. But it's also extremely hard, and I don't know how he manages to do this, and this must be a testament towards his wrist flexibility. But it's very hard to flap your wrist with a closed fist technique, because the closed fist technique is the prevention of flapping your wrist, because it doesn't allow you to flap your wrist compared to the open hand or a pencil grip technique. When we are sprinting, we want to keep our wrist stiff so that it prevents flapping of the wrist. A major problem with the closed fist technique is that it can potentially create a lot of tension in the arm, which can make some athletes feel less uncomfortable and can be slower for their arm drive, as they are more tense and not necessarily as relaxed as compared to, say for instance, the open hand technique. Guys, I hope you enjoyed that video. Let me know what you want to see next and who you want to see. You want to see a reaction of. Which great performance needs a reaction by SSA Athletics. Next week, we're going to be talking about Femke Bol. Femke Bol, the Dutch 400 meter female version of Usain Bolt. But more importantly, at this present moment in time, smash that subscribe. And if you want to see Usain Bolt, you click this video here. I'm Adam McCarthy, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.